I was always one for adventure. Hitchhiking across the country seemed like the perfect way to experience the freedom I craved. But on that cold, rainy night, adventure took me somewhere far darker than I had ever imagined. My name is Jack. I was thumbing rides from Oregon down to California, eager to see the coast. The last car had dropped me off on a desolate stretch of highway. The rain started soon after, turning the dirt beneath my feet into a slick, muddy mess. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and trudged forward, hoping to find shelter before nightfall. I stumbled upon an old, overgrown path veering off from the highway. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and the path seemed to lead into the woods where I might find some cover. Desperation made the decision for me. I followed the path, hoping it would lead to a cabin or an old shed, anything to get out of the rain. As I pushed through the underbrush, the path opened up into a small clearing. There, partially hidden by foliage, was an old, rusted gate. A faded sign hung crookedly on it, the words barely legible, U.S. government property, keep out. The gate was ajar, hanging off one hinge, as if someone or something had forced it open long ago. Curiosity got the better of me. I slipped through the gate and found myself staring at a set of stone steps leading down into the earth. The entrance was flanked by two crumbling pillars, covered in moss and vines. It looked like the entrance to some forgotten crypt. I hesitated for a moment, then started down the steps. The deeper I went, the darker it became, until I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I fished out my lighter and flicked it on, the small flame casting eerie shadows on the damp stone walls. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a heavy metal door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and it groaned in protest. Inside, a narrow corridor stretched out before me, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The air was musty and cold, and I could hear the distant hum of machinery. I walked cautiously, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. The corridor branched off into multiple rooms, most of them filled with old, broken equipment and rusting metal tables. It looked like some kind of abandoned laboratory. As I explored further, I began to notice strange symbols etched into the walls, symbols that made my skin crawl. They looked like a mix of mathematical equations and arcane glyphs, something out of a nightmare. In one room, I found a large glass tank filled with murky liquid. Floating inside was a grotesque, deformed creature. Its eyes were closed, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles. I stumbled back, my heart racing. What the hell was this place? I moved deeper into the complex, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, filled with rows of metal cages. Some were empty, their doors hanging open. Others contained skeletal remains, their bones picked clean. As I backed away, I heard a faint noise, a soft, shuffling sound. I turned and saw a figure moving in the shadows. It was a man, dressed in a tattered lab coat, his eyes wild and haunted. He looked at me, and I saw recognition in his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice cracked and raspy. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I was just trying to get out of the rain." "What is this place?" He shook his head. "A mistake. An abomination. They left us here to die, but some of us survived." Before I could ask more, he turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, trembling, unsure of what to do. I had to get out of there. I retraced my steps, but the corridors seemed to twist and turn in ways I didn't remember. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. The walls seemed to close in on me, the flickering lights casting sinister shadows. I stumbled into another room, and what I saw there will haunt me forever. The walls were lined with large glass tubes, each containing a person. They were alive, their eyes wide with terror, but they couldn't move. Tubes and wires were connected to their bodies, feeding them some kind of viscous fluid. Their mouths were open in silent screams, and their eyes followed me as I moved through the room. I had to get out. I had to find a way out. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see a group of people approaching. They were dressed in black uniforms, their faces obscured by masks. They carried weapons and moved with military precision. I ducked into a side corridor, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear them talking, their voices muffled but urgent. They were looking for me. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, desperate to find the exit. I turned a corner and found myself back at the stairs. Relief washed over me as I sprinted up the steps, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind me. I burst out into the night, the cold rain hitting my face like a welcome reprieve. I ran down the overgrown path, not stopping until I reached the highway. I flagged down the first car I saw, a kind older couple who looked at me with concern. "Are you all right, son?" the man asked as I collapsed into the back seat. "Just drive," I gasped. "Please, just get me out of here." They drove me to the nearest town, where I spent the night in a cheap motel, the events of the night replaying in my mind. I wanted to go to the police, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. The next morning, I checked out of the motel and made my way to the bus station. As I waited for my bus, I noticed a man watching me from across the street. He was dressed in a black suit, his face impassive. I knew he was one of them. I boarded the bus and didn't look back. I knew I had to keep moving, to stay off the grid. They were looking for me, and I couldn't let them find me. I never spoke about what I saw in those ruins, but the nightmares never stopped. Every night, I see the faces of those people in the glass tubes, their eyes pleading for help. I hear the shuffling footsteps of the man in the lab coat, his voice a haunting whisper. "You shouldn't be here." I don't know what they were doing down there, or why they abandoned the place. But I do know one thing, some secrets are meant to stay buried. And some doors should never be opened. The open road had always been my escape. Hitchhiking across the country gave me a sense of freedom I couldn't find anywhere else. It was late autumn, and I was making my way through a dense forest, hoping to find a place to camp before nightfall. The sky was beginning to darken, and the chill in the air signaled the approach of winter. As I walked along the winding road, I noticed a flicker of light in the distance. Curiosity piqued, I veered off the road and headed towards it. After a short trek through the underbrush, I found a campsite nestled in a clearing. A group of fellow hitchhikers had set up camp, and they were sitting around a fire, talking and laughing. "Hey there," one of them called out as I approached. "You look like you could use some warmth." "Thanks," I replied, smiling as I stepped into the light of the fire. "I was just looking for a place to camp for the night." "Well, you found it," said a tall guy with long hair and a scruffy beard. "Name's Mark. This is Lisa, Tom, and Jenny." He pointed to the others around the fire. I introduced myself and sat down, grateful for the warmth and the company. They seemed like good people, fellow wanderers just like me. We swapped stories of our travels, sharing laughs and a sense of camaraderie that made me feel at ease. As the night wore on, the fire began to die down. I noticed Lisa, a quiet girl who had been sitting across from me, get up and slip away into the darkness. She moved with a purpose, and curiosity gnawed at me. Where was she going? Why was she sneaking off? I waited a few minutes, then quietly excused myself and followed her, keeping a safe distance. The forest was pitch black, and I used the light of my phone to guide me. I could hear the crunch of leaves under her feet, and I followed the sound, my heart pounding with anticipation. After a short walk, I saw a faint light ahead. I crept closer, hiding behind a tree as I peered into the clearing. What I saw made my blood run cold. Lisa had joined a group of people, all wearing dark robes and hoods. They stood in a circle around a makeshift altar, chanting in low, guttural voices. On the altar was a newborn baby, its cries muffled by the eerie chants. My stomach churned as the realization hit me. This was a satanic cult, and they were preparing to sacrifice the baby. I had to do something, but fear paralyzed me. If they saw me, I would be next. I took a step back, my foot snapping a twig. The sound echoed through the clearing, and the chanting stopped abruptly. Every hooded head turned towards me, and I felt their eyes boring into my soul. I turned and ran, branches whipping at my face as I tore through the forest. Behind me, I heard the shouts of the cult members and the pounding of their footsteps. Panic fueled my flight, and I pushed myself to run faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I spotted a tall structure looming in the distance, the watchtower. If I could reach it, I might be safe. I sprinted towards it, my legs burning with exertion. As I reached the base of the tower, I glanced over my shoulder and saw the cult members closing in, their eyes gleaming with malevolence. I scrambled up the ladder, my hands slipping on the rungs as I climbed. I reached the top and burst into the small room at the top of the tower. A park ranger was sitting at a desk, his eyes widening in surprise as I stumbled in. "Help!" I gasped, collapsing to the floor. "They're coming." They were going to sacrifice a baby. The ranger quickly locked the door and grabbed his radio. "This is Ranger Davis. We have an emergency at the watchtower. Send backup immediately." He helped me to my feet and peered out the window. The cult members had reached the base of the tower, and they were staring up at us, their faces twisted with anger and hatred. "Stay here," Davis said, his voice calm but firm. "Backup will be here soon." Minutes felt like hours as we waited, the tension in the room thick and suffocating. The cult members below made no move to climb the tower, but their presence was enough to keep my heart racing. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the night, and a group of park rangers and police officers arrived, dispersing the cult members. Davis and I descended the tower, and I led them back to the clearing where I had seen the ritual. But when we arrived, the clearing was empty. The altar was gone, and there was no sign of the baby or the cult members. It was as if they had never been there. "They were right here," I insisted, my voice shaking. "I saw them." The officers searched the area thoroughly but found nothing. They exchanged skeptical glances, and I could see the doubt in their eyes. "Look, we'll keep an eye out," one of the officers said. "But it looks like they cleared out. You should get some rest." Davis took me back to the watchtower and made me a cup of coffee. "You did the right thing, coming here," he said. "We'll keep an eye on the area. Try to get some sleep." I nodded, but sleep was impossible. The images of the ritual and the cult members haunted me, their chants echoing in my mind. I stayed in the watchtower until morning, too afraid to venture back into the forest. The next day, Davis escorted me back to the road and gave me a ride to the nearest town. As I climbed out of his truck, he handed me a card. "If you ever need help, call me," he said. I thanked him and watched as he drove away, the events of the previous night still fresh in my mind. I found a cheap motel and checked in, collapsing onto the bed in exhaustion. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to put the experience behind me. But the nightmares persisted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the cult members were still out there, watching and waiting. I moved from place to place, never staying in one town for too long, always looking over my shoulder. I never told anyone else about what I saw that night. I knew they wouldn't believe me. But the fear remained, a constant companion in my travels. I avoided the forests and stuck to well-traveled roads, the memory of that clearing a dark shadow that haunted me. Years later, I still find myself waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the sound of chanting echoing in my ears. I know the cult is still out there, somewhere, and I can't help but wonder if they'll come for me one day. The open road is no longer a place of freedom for me. It's a place of fear, where the shadows hide malevolent secrets, and the darkness is filled with unseen eyes. I keep moving, always moving, hoping to outrun the memories that chase me. But deep down, I know that no matter how far I run, the terror of that night will always be with me, a dark stain on my soul. And every time I see a flicker of light in the distance, I feel a shiver of fear, wondering if I've stumbled upon another nightmare, another dark secret waiting to be uncovered.